Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next in a series of our chats with some of the authors of the book Digital Experiences of International Students. And today we have got with us Siobhan McPhee, who is from the University of British Columbia, joining uh, Associate Professor Catherine Gomez from RMIT University. And we are here to talk about your chapter, Siobhan. Tell us a little bit about your chapter.
Well, I'll give a bit of context as to where the research came from. And part of my position here at UBC is within our international program. So UBC acknowledged back in 2012 that there was a need for an international program that was aimed specifically at students who were excelling academically, but for whom English was an additional language, who were not getting entry into UBC based on their TOEFL or their IELTS scores. So started the Vantage One program, and a number of subjects within the Faculty of Arts were involved with that, as well as across Faculty of Science and Applied Science. So geography was one of those, and I myself have a background in teaching in international high schools and being a student myself. So I'm really interested with this notion of English as an additional language, and especially doing your degree in a language that is not your first language or the default language. So the students that we work with are from all over the world, but we do have a large proportion that come from Asia, just given the relationship between the West Coast and BC in particular and Asia. So it's a case of looking at what are the specific issues that students face when they're coming into a degree in which English is an additional language. And so I found it very important to think about cultural learning styles, but then part and parcel with that is this notion of blended learning. And as a geographer, blended learning almost comes as a default, because in geography, we talk a lot about experiential learning, field work, and it seems ironic in our Zoom world right now to think about online teaching and that, but back when we started the Vantage One program in 2013, it was a sense of like, how can we make this relatable to what students, the context that students are coming from. I don't want them, and only being a recent arrival to Canada myself, I didn't feel it's like, oh, we'll teach them all about Canadian geography. So it's more about this sense of internationalization of curriculum, where you're focusing on the key concepts, but then bringing in contexts around the world and contexts that are relatable to students. And doing that through a blended approach means that students are given these case studies, which they do. And with the international students, I would do it within a classroom. I do it within a classroom context so that I'm there, my teaching assistants are there to support them. But the emphasis is on them actually doing the work themselves. So the chapter came out of thinking about that, and then thinking about how students experienced that, and how it contributed to their understanding of geography, but also how it supported them in their language acquisition.
Mm. And because it's focused on international students, I mean, Kat and I have been asked this question numerous times. While we focus on international students, are they necessarily different to domestic students? Did you have any learnings from your experience teaching the broader group of students versus teaching international students, for example, with
that's
the online
space? That's a really good question. And I think that's the concept of the cultural learning style that I mentioned. I've learned over the years, and because I also teach obviously within the Department of Geography, direct entry students, not first years so far, but third and fourth years. And of course, our students come from a range of backgrounds. Like Australia, we're a settler colonial state, so people have come from all over. They come with their own cultural understanding. Many of them don't speak English at home. So to your question of like, is it different? I actually think that some of the lessons that I learned teaching within the international program have been very beneficial to thinking about domestic students, or for whom English is a first language, because you can't assume that everybody comes from the same background. So yeah, I would say that that's been very beneficial. And again, even within direct entry classes, we have, as I said, Canadians from many, many different ethnic backgrounds. And so the academic English support, I also try and work that in, not as like English support, but language support. So with the articles that I give my students to read, I try and annotate them or give them questions to support their reading, to make it more focused. Because I think as academics, we tend to just go, oh, here, go do that. And one frame fits all. And it definitely doesn't.
That seems to be a common theme across the book, where we start to say that although we are focused on international students' experiences, actually acknowledging this diversity of experiences is going to strengthen our engagement with all groups of students, because what it does is to understand the diversity of our student experience. That seems to be happening across the book. Now, of course, you started writing the chapter before we even knew about the pandemic. So with the pandemic now happening, what do you think are some future ways that we need to address this issue of teaching and learning across culture, whether it's in a blended or an online or remotely, whatever we call it? What are some of the challenges and things that we need to look out for in the future?
That's a really good question. And to speak first to this idea of online learning, I think what we're doing right now, well, I mean, some people are obviously teaching online courses and have been, but I like to think about what we're doing now as remote teaching, because designing an online course takes years, to design a good online course. And for me personally, the shift has I mean, I dislike remote teaching, I dislike Zoom, but the notion of synchronous and asynchronous and blended, the transition wasn't as challenging because I incorporated a lot of those interactive case studies as part of the asynchronous, and then limiting the time that I have with students. In terms of the future, like I'm really finding it, I'll be honest, a struggle with my international students this term. Previous term, like when the lockdown first started in March, was actually fine because I knew them. I'd had them for 9 weeks face to face. So when we were on Zoom, I was able to say, oh yeah, you're right. I remember you said that, and or you came. And whereas now, like, you know, I have 76 students on a Zoom call, and like they don't turn on their videos, which is fair enough. So there's no, and also many of them come from cultures where the instructor is the expert. So speaking up is not, and I deconstruct that when we're in face-to-face. So I think what I've tried to do, and it's definitely more successful with my non-international student classes, is just to humanize it with, you know, to empathize with students and say, I am, and I know this is within the pandemic, but you know, I am human too, and this is how I learn. And I know that exams are hard. I struggled with that. So this is why I provide alternative forms of assessment. So I think as educators, we have to think of our own positionality and our own background, and then that allows us to empathize more with our students, and how for them, you know, speaking up in class or working on a group project just doesn't come naturally. But I also think that we really do need to make our content more relatable. And that doesn't mean we're going to satisfy every single student from every country, but more relatable in terms of even their own lives. And that's how I even think about the digital technologies. I joke and say, like, my students are born with their smartphones in their hands. So why don't I just incorporate them into my teaching? Because they're going to use them anyway. So it's just, you know, thinking about how can it be relatable to their everyday lives.
Thank you. Thank you. Kat, your comments.
Well, first of all, I have to apologize for my dog barking. She does not like people walking past her house, so she doesn't relate to them. But I really like what you were talking about, relatable, and I think this is a key thing that you were discussing, and whenever we discuss about digital, we always talk about how, or conventional ideas about how the digital is this inclusive space, but it isn't, because everyone comes to even the digital from their own cultural perspective. And so even with, like what you're talking about, how using the digital, using Zoom because of COVID, where your international students in particular are struggling. Again, it's about that relatability, within that online space. And it's been so challenging, hasn't it, in the last few months, where we're trying to, as instructors, we're trying to find these markers that allow students to not just relate to the course content, but also to relate to each other. It's so hard to talk to. If we find it difficult talking to students who all we see are circles, and can you imagine about students themselves? That is what they also see, So that relatability is also challenged because students can't find those social networks with each other, which I think you point out really, really well. And what you were talking about is also that we don't have answers yet. And we should never rush to find those answers. It really is about, and this is what sort of like, coming out with great programs about. It's about actually waiting, watching, understanding, creating. And I think this is something sort of like, which you have been talking about in your chapter, and what you were telling us today. I mean, at the end of today, I think the key word here is relatability.
I agree. Yeah.
And this is, again, this challenge within international education. How do we create not just courses, but programs and content where students have certain aspects that they can relate to? Because once you start relating, you understand. Like you say, if I was your student and I come from Australia, or I was born in Singapore, it'll be so difficult as a first year student trying to understand the Canadian context, and it's worse still when it's, through this digital sort of like platform, because I may be studying remotely in Australia or in Singapore, so how is the Canadian content relatable? So those are some exciting challenges, I think. And I think this is something that you have been talking about quite a bit within your chapter. So it's really exciting to hear you verbalize this today as well.
I'm glad. I can also give an example about some of the shifts that I've done in the remote teaching. So as part of the first year course for the international students, what I created was an app that took them downtown Vancouver. So the idea of relating to the city that they're living in. Obviously, 95% of them are not here right now. So I made that virtual. So now they do a virtual 360 tour of Vancouver in the hope that they can get a little bit of a sense of where they are studying, where they're local, relating to the place. I totally agree.
That's fantastic.
And I think, one benefit I hope will come out of remote teaching or on, this pandemic situation is maybe more of a shift to less of the instructor as the expert and more to the possibility of blended, no matter what that looks like, whether you're incorporating educational technologies or not, but just the sense that we need to like really listen to our students and bring them in as embodying knowledge as well, and that it's about relating then, a knowledge exchange. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Siobhan. This has been such a good chat, and of course we look forward to sharing your chapter with the world. I think another thing to look forward to is that the students that we are currently teaching have not come from a world where they're used to blended learning or where they have had to study remotely. But in the next few years, the students coming to university will be the ones who actually spend a whole year studying remotely. And this is no longer a new experience for them, and they'll have different expectations. You'll have to meet those expectations. Always something challenging and exciting to look forward to in the space of higher education. And, you know, I might request to access that app of yours to check out downtown
Sure.
Vancouver, because after all, we were supposed to catch up earlier in the year, and that all got cancelled. So
yeah,
thank you
I'll
very
send you
much.
both the link and yeah. Thank you both very much. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat.